They said the truth won't survive beside the lies that maintain the decaying faces of this place.
Hey everybody, what's up, man? It's Hold the Truth Hostage, where if the truth was so important, we wouldn't negotiate with lies, we would hold the truth hostage. Now, I haven't recorded a new video in a while. Part of it has to do with, I guess I just have to start, making a list of videos I should be doing. That way, I could put something out. But this video I think is extremely important, and should have been something. I covered this type of video before, but not with this new perspective. So what I'm gonna talk about on this video is why I think because I've done a video on the nuclear family and why it fails, why the nuclear family is actually just a design for destruction anyway. It's literally designed for the destruction of the family to begin with, because I didn't go into deeper detail last time. Well, I went into detail, but not like this. But the other reason I think the nuclear family is designed for failure is that you got to look at the success of a marriage, the success of a long-term relationship. It's usually built on reference. It's usually built on reference, as in, for example, if you're a child who grew up in a very loving household where you had both families, where you had your mother and your father together, if that's your point of reference, you will value that, and you will look at that as a very normal and traditional, very important fabric of your identity. It's kind of what they say. They'll tell you that children, for example, a son will look for the characteristics and standards of his mother and the woman he'll marry. And same thing will happen to a daughter. She'll look for the characteristics and standards of her father and the man she will marry. Now, the reason I personally think that you look at the nuclear family and why it's such a path of destruction is that the nuclear family was all about destroying the extended family. The extended family, which is your uncles, your grandmother, your uncles, your cousins, aspects of family beyond just the two people in the household, your mother and your father. And you got to think about that. Without that present in the life of a child, or even in the life of the mother and father of said children, the shelf life of the marriage is already predetermined for destruction. Because think about it. If for example, let's say a man gets married, and let's say this man who got married, he had an extended family. You know what I'm saying? He had an extended family, as in he had access to his grandmother, his parents, his cousins, his uncles, and so on. So he had access to his extended family. Then the woman he marries, she only had access to her mother and father. You know what I'm saying? Her mother and father. That's all she had access to. So when you look at those dynamics in the long term, you got to think about it. What happens with extended family? Now, a lot of people, when they hear the word extended family, they just hear, well, that's my cousins, my great uncle, and so on. That's the family. No, you don't understand that. That's another step. That's another step That's extremely important. So, for example, let's say the woman who never had an extended family, she knows the meaning of being, I guess, a wife and so on. But what happens with being a wife and so on is eventually she has to become an extended family member, as in she will eventually become a aunt, a grandmother. You know what I'm saying? These are roles that are further expand beyond the nuclear family. You know, beyond the nucleus of mom and dad, eventually mom and dad will become uncle, grandmother, you know what I'm saying, great uncle, and so on. As in, there's a position beyond that nuclear family, you know, nuclear family bubble that's available, which is to eventually become an extended family member, a grandma, a great grandmother, an uncle, an aunt. You know, these are other positions. So when those positions were never experienced by that woman in that man's life, then eventually what happens is that already sets what will destroy the the family, is if it ever expands beyond being a nuclear family. If it reaches a point where it'll expand, she'll have to leave it because she has no experience in seeing that role. For example, if she doesn't have a role, an experience, a point of reference where her mother and her father were a part of an extended family, as in her mother was a great aunt and her father was a great uncle or something like that. She hasn't seen them play that role. Her whole life, she's only seen them play the role of mom and dad. She's always been in a nuclear family bubble. So expanding beyond that is outside of her comfort zone. This is another reason why you see there was such an advertisement and promotion for the nuclear family, because the nuclear family would mean that if a family attempts to expand beyond that, it will eventually destroy itself, you know, because the success that was promoted and marketed was to be a nuclear family, not an extended family, not having access to your great grandmothers and uncles and so on. Now, of course, the nucleus, somewhat at times a part of the nucleus is the grandmother, you know, the grandfather. Sometimes, you know, that is part of the nucleus if divorce wasn't available. You know, you might, you know, at times you'll see a nuclear family have access to a great grandmother, a great a grandfather, not a great, a grandfather. They usually have immediate access to, potentially, you know, a child will have access to their mother's father, you know what I'm saying, if he was in their life and so on. We're just assuming if she was raised in the nucleus. And so if that man had access to his extended family, you know what I'm saying, the value system of that, having access to his extended family, his great grandmother and his great uncle and his cousins and so on, and the woman he's with didn't, it will be very foreign to her. And then they can't truly build what eventually is the complete access to the family, which is the extended family. The extended family is truly the goal. The nuclear family is really a trap. It's to be loyal to limiting access to your family. You know what I'm saying? And limiting that access, the nuclear family, what it creates is it really traps your family and actually opens them up to corporate media, social media, all that, because there isn't an extended family to filter that out. That your children aren't spending time with their grandmothers, their great uncles, and so on. So they're not spending time to filter that out. Then because you don't have access to an extended family, you're set up to depend on a nuclear family. And the major benefit of having experience with the extended family is that the extended family is the point of expansion and actually the point of not limiting your family's experience, and also it's the number one way to filter out the influence of those outside of your family, those outside of your family and corporate, social media and so on. Because, for example, if your children or you, for example, let's focus on you. If you were raised with access to your grandfather, access to your uncles, aunts, and so on, you had access to your extended family, what happens is that while you were being raised, there was never truly a moment where you were vulnerable when it came to what was being taught to you. As in, for example, if your parents were not home, your uncle might be home. Your uncle or your grandparents might be home, and you might talk to them or have access to them to do some extracurricular activities, maybe fishing, maybe fixing a car, or, for the women, maybe knitting, working on the family quilt or something. Basically, the access to the extended family ensured that, you could filter out what society was teaching you or trying to teach you, or what consumerism was trying to basically, propagate, push against you, and what happens is when you're raised in the nucleus, the nuclear family is completely open. It's open to destruction easily, because it depends so much on the mother and father having access to them. If the mother and father are working, the children won't have access to them. So those children end up being raised by corporate or being raised by social media, entertainment, and so on, because they don't have access to their parents. And the other thing is, and I've covered this for over 2 years, is that the destruction that happens when only the nuclear family is accessible is that the children are usually raised in a void. They're raised in a void of basically potentially, I'd say around, the children are raised where their parents can't relate to them. Let's say around the age of probably 4 to about maybe 10 years old, maybe 4 to 10 years old. There's a window where the parents just don't understand or can't really see anything they recognize in that child, because at that age, let's say 4 to 10, that's where their parents knew them. You see, the value of the extended family is far more than family reunions and so on. A major aspect of that value is that if you, for example, growing up, you have access to your grandparents, your grandparents and your uncles and so on, they can identify characteristics in you as a child that only they could have seen, because at the moment they were raising or helping raise you as a child. So they can identify characteristics and behavior patterns that happened when you were a kid, while your parents, unlike your grandparents, they can't. Your parents do not remember, for example, your parents do not remember how they were, how they behaved when they were basically, 4 years old, 6 years old, 7, 8. They don't remember. And if they do, they have very strong memory, but they don't. Majority of people don't remember that age period. the people remember is usually their parents. That's why there's such a value in grandparents, because grandparents can see what you will be at your youngest moment. And they can identify that and point that out to your parents by saying, look, he's as hyper, or she is very quiet, just like you were. They can pinpoint characteristics that lead to your parents, And what this does is it allows your parents to see you for who you are a lot sooner. And also it allows your parents to nurture stronger aspects of your character that were positive for them when they were little. And also helps them to deal with problems you would have when you were a little child. So there's a very important aspects your grandparents and your extended family play, because without them, what happens is you're raised in a void. You're raised and this is probably one of the most dangerous periods of your life. A lot of people say, well, the most dangerous period of a child's life is their teenage years, their teenage years. When in reality, no, it's not. The most dangerous aspect of your life when a kid is very lonely and feels they don't have, they can't relate to their family is around, I think, about 4 to potentially 10 years old. Because if their parents can't relate to them at their youngest, their most easily influenced age, by the time they're teenagers, man, it's gone. You're raised in a void where your parents can't relate to you around the ages, let's say, like I said, 4 to 10 years old potentially, or even 4 to 12, depending on what your parents remember. So if you're raised in that void, your friends, the school, entertainment, everything else becomes what you will utilize to cope, to find some people you can identify with, or become something that people can identify with, because your parents can't really identify with you. I mean, at that young age, yes, they'll love you, they'll feed you, they'll see you as more vulnerable, because you're little, but that's it. But when it comes to characteristics, identifying characteristics, they won't know unless they remember their parents. Like, for example, your grandparents telling your parents over and over again how they were when they were very young. Unless they have a point of reference to that, they will be raising you in a void where they can't identify your behavioral patterns. And this will lead to a point where you're left alone, and you're left to society and corporate schools to raise you. You're extremely vulnerable at that age, 4 to about, let's say, 4 to 12. So extremely vulnerable to influences outside of your family and your household. In a nuclear household, it usually isn't enough. It's never enough, because the grandparents have a perspective that your parents will never have, and your parents' uncles have a perspective they will never have, because they were too young to remember. So the extended family is extremely important, because it provides a level of nurturing that really covers your entire life from birth to adulthood. The extended family has a perspective on that entirety, while the nuclear family, it has a lot of holes. It has a lot of missing perspectives, and usually in a nuclear family, you'll be able to be raised from about, like I said, about one to potentially 2 years old, and then they'll skip raising you and relating to you at the age of potentially, let's say 4 to 12 years old. The nuclear family, it's a missing point. And then you become a teenager. That's when your parents can start relating to you because they can remember who they were. They have a perspective on who they were when they were 12 to about 18. They can remember their preteen years and their teenage years. So now they can relate to you. But by the time they come and they can relate to you, they're strangers. You know, the kid doesn't know them because you weren't able to relate to them when they were about 4 to potentially 12 years old. You weren't able to relate. So now the parents come, and by the time they come, you know, who they were and how they were as teenagers, the kid potentially can't even relate to them because they're missing that year of age 4 to about 12. You know, so the kids come like, I don't really know you. I know my friends. You know, I know my music, my MTV, well, dating myself. That doesn't matter. You know, I know my music and all that, my pop culture, but I don't know, I'm not the same as you when I was a teenager. Maybe there's some parts of it, you know, the kid might display some aspects. For example, if a father was very stubborn as a teenager and he sees his son as a teenager who's very stubborn, he'll say, oh, son, you're just like me. You're as stubborn as me. But the father doesn't understand that. No, he's stubborn because there was from age 4 to about 12, you didn't know him. You didn't know him. You could not relate to him. He's stubborn because he doesn't relate to you at all. He can't understand you. So, you know, that's the curse of growing up without your grandparents who can identify characteristics in you at an earlier age. Your grandparents, they remember who you were. They remember who your parents were from the beginning of life to about their teenage years. You know, so your grandparents and the older relatives play an extremely important aspect of your life. And that's why the nuclear family, I mean, a lot of people think the nuclear family is, you know, like the nucleus, you know, the nucleus of your cells. But in actuality, the nuclear family is more of a nuclear bomb perspective. It's designed, you know, society that wants to manipulate that family, they value that a lot. They value the nuclear family because they want direct access as soon as possible. They don't want to have to go through the hassle of going through your extended family, your extended relatives, your grandparents, your great uncle, and so on. That's too much work. But if it's just the nuclear family, now they can manipulate. They can manipulate the children a lot more. They can manipulate the family a lot more. They can set standards that you must validate to. But if you had access to your extended family and your relatives, which have a whole different culture and have a whole different experience, you know, a longer level of experience in life, and can tell you, no, that ain't valuable. That doesn't matter. You know, they can tell you that. They can basically filter out the problems of the propaganda. You know, it's trying to manipulate. So the extended family is very dangerous to a corporate society. It's dangerous to politics as well. Politicians that now rely on chaos, rely on instability of how you were raised in your family so they can relate to you. Because, you know, if you were raised in a nuclear family where, you know, the family value solely comes from just seeing your mom and your dad, then the rest of your life when they're not there, when they're busy with their jobs, you don't see your grandparents, you don't see your great uncles or nothing like that. You were raised by society, raised by the television and what's popular, or TV, YouTube, whatever it is. You were raised by that. You're a lot easier to manipulate because you don't have that. You can't close your eyes and picture your entire life where your family was completely involved, your extended family. So you have points in your life where you avoid, where it's very pitch black and you are alone and you are only with your friends if you have any. Your friends were who were raising you and growing up with you. So there's a lot that depends on, especially when it comes to manipulation of the nuclear family. And then think about the nuclear family. If it decays, if it breaks down, what happens? So if your parents, for example, divorce, and that's all you've had was your parents, mom and dad, when they divorce and you don't have the support structure of the extended family, as in you don't have access to your grandparents, your great uncles, you don't have access to them like that, where you could sleep in their household. They could volunteer to watch you or babysit you or take care of you. Then you're now going to be raised in the destruction of that household, which is the destruction of potentially single mother household, or potentially, if extremely rarely, just raised by your father, raised by your father. And, the instability of that, of not having a whole family. But if it was a situation where you had the extended family, so for example, let's say your mother left your father and you had access to your extended family, your aunts, your uncles, your grandparents, and so on, it'll be a lot easier for you to recover and be stable, because you can always look at them as an example. You could look at the stability of your grandparents or the stability of your great uncles and so on. You're still within that family bubble and that family circle. So you would look at your mother's and father's divorce as, they didn't value, depending on who's to blame. Let's say the divorce was because of your father. You'll look at your father and say he just didn't value the extended family as much. He didn't value that. Or if it was the fault of your mother, you'll be, she didn't value the extended family experience and being with a family, because the goal of a family is to expand. It's to expand far beyond that bubble of the nuclear family. So when you don't have that, to lean on, the extended family, the expanded family, whatever you want to call it, it is doomed for destruction, and you'll be raised in a void. Think about it. If you were raised at 4 to 12 years old, where your parents can't relate to you, you're going to be raised by your school system. You're going to be raised with your friends that were raised in a void. This is why a lot of kids these days, that were raised in a nuclear family say, my friends mean more to me than my family. Because it's true. That's all they had. That's all they had. When they were ignored and, their parents couldn't tell who they were or identify who they were, the friends they were raised with, were going through the same thing. And they just were raised in a void together. They go to school from 8 to 4 p.m. together every 5 days a week. So, of course, they'll relate more to their friends, who are also going through the same thing if they're in a nuclear family. They're all being raised in a void for the next, from age 4 to about 12 years old, so they relate to each other. It's a very crucial moment in their life, and they relate to each other more than family, because they didn't have access to their extended family, their cousins, their other relatives, to actually identify characteristics and behavior patterns of who they were and will be based on who their parents were when they were little and younger kids. So that's a major aspect of this. This is why the nuclear family, as much as people want to say, oh man, it's family tradition is nuclear family. No, it ain't. The nuclear family, the whole propaganda on that started in the 40s or 50s? You know what I'm saying? That means the nuclear family is far less important than the extended family that was around since long before the 1950s, which got families together and built families, built structure and organizations of families and so on. So you got to understand that you're sacrificing the extended family. And think about that. Think about that where modern day you don't really hear extended families anymore, where people, unless they're immigrants or something, you don't really hear them talk about, yeah, my great granduncle was this and that. I talked to my grandparents, I talked to my great uncles and so on. You don't see that family fabric. You know what I'm saying? You gotta look at family kind of, I forget, threads, kind of like threads on a comforter. The less threads you have to your family, as in the less access you have to your extended family, the weaker you are. The more easily manipulated and the less solid you are, because you have less threads to your family, less webs. Let's just use spider webs, less webbing and connections and links to your extended family. So this is what happens, and it's truly a major problem in what's going on right now, and why people are so easily broken, why families are so easily destroyed, because there just isn't that level of access and comfort to the family. So hopefully this video helps some people out, and it explains a lot more, because the nuclear family, it's a trap. If that becomes your entire goal, is a nuclear family where you work, and let's say you, the father, the mom and dad, y'all work, and then you just leave your children alone. You leave your children alone to be raised by society. And think about that, is that you look at babysitters. Think about that. It used to be the babysitters were your older cousins, your older cousins, your older relatives. They used to be your babysitters, your uncles and so on. But the further involved and the further the goal becomes achieving validation from the nuclear family, what happens is that's seen as an act of being poor. That's seen as an act of not being able to afford hiring someone that's a complete stranger. And think about it, these people you're hiring have potentially completely different traditional values, cultural values, and that's who you want to have take care of your children. A complete stranger versus, your cousin's gonna watch you. They're gonna give your cousin, like they give your cousin $50 or something, depending on the money they give your family relative, and they'll raise you. They'll look out for you. They'll watch you. Someone you can relate to by blood. Instead, we're at the point with the nuclear family, it's all about putting you in the hands of a complete stranger, someone that no one in your family knows, to raise you, just to validate the dependency of the nuclear family. Because the way the nuclear family works, it's all about only your mom and your dad. Only they can influence you. Not your grandparents. That would be the extended family. So if your mom and your dad cannot influence you, people they put in their place can. People that are not related to you. So the nuclear family is a major trap. It's a trap that leads to where we are now, where, the government wanted, and all the corporatism wanted for them to have you value their perspective and their propaganda. They need you to not expand or value the extended family. Because think about the extended family. It would take you further out. Let's say you got a cousin that lives in Alabama, and you're from New Jersey. You're from Jersey. Your main goal would be, I got to get my kids to visit my cousin in Alabama. I gotta leave them with my cousin in Alabama for a week or two, or go meet up with them. Or if you value the extended family, the way you move are different. You're like, you know what, I want to be close to my family, so I don't want to move too far from them. I won't move too far from them. I won't move too outside of state. I won't move too far. I gotta stay close to my extended family. I always gotta have access to my family. So your family values are absolutely your priority. And it becomes extremely hard for corporate government to manipulate you. But if they can get you to value solely the nucleus, the nuclear family, now they can completely manipulate and destroy you. Look at the single mother household, and you look at that. That's a very massive I forget the word. That's a massive problem, major problem right now, because it was so easily created because they deteriorated the value of the extended family, which held us as a human society forever, since our very beginning. It's our survival is about how much family we have. Once they've deteriorated that, it becomes extremely easy to manipulate you, and now they have you seeking to be a part of the nuclear family, which the nuclear family isn't even over 1,000 years old. It isn't even potentially over 500 years old, nuclear family values, or even 200 years, the nuclear family values. So the nuclear family values is extremely new, and it does not originate with our values as humanity. Humans, our value as a species, Homo sapiens, whatever you want to call it. You know what I mean? Our value has always been the extended family, and that's what's gotten us where we are now. When it comes to the evolution of our species and our success and our dominance, it came from the extended family. And now the government has this value, this multi-generations of the nuclear family. And think about that, multi-generations of the nuclear family, where people were raised where they had no access to their grandparents, no access to their extended family, their great uncles, their second cousin or third cousin, and so on. They didn't have access to that. They don't have access to a long, storied image of their family. So now the government has access to multi-generations of the nuclear family, where it's just mom and dad in the household. No grandparents, no cousins, no uncles, just that's it. That's the image of what it means to be family, mom and dad. And then the lack of experience from mom and dad seeing what it means to eventually be grandparents, or grandparents being an extended family member. You know what I'm saying? Now they don't know how to play that role. So you'll see a higher rate of divorces, because once mom and dad get past the age where, when they're heading towards the age of grandparents, there's no point of reference. There's no point of reference to playing that role of being a grandparent. So they eventually easily break up. And you know what I'm saying? You see a divorce. They don't even become grandparents. They don't reach that age. Like, if you look at most marriages, most divorces now, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of these divorces are happening before the parents can reach the grandparents' age, before they can reach the age of being grandparents. So around, let's say, 50 something, you know what I'm saying? 50, let's just say 50. So before they can reach the age of 50, they're already divorced, because their whole perspective is on playing the role of mom and dad, not grandma and grandpa. You know what I'm saying? They don't know the experience of that role in their life. They just know how to play the nuclear family, which is mom and dad. So once their children are about to reach that age where they could become grandparents, the divorce bell starts ringing. The divorce, the instability starts ringing, you know. So by the time their children are at the age where they would have to play the role of grandma and grandpa, they've already divorced. So the children don't have access to that because they don't know what it means to play the role of extended family. They just know how to play the role of the nuclear family, you know. So there's a lot into that. There's a lot that goes into this, and there's a lot of aspects of it that's problematic. And like I said, you look at the divorce rate, look at the single motherhood rate, it's a lot easier to manipulate. The government wants, when you have a government that's seeking to succeed from the instability of family in its citizens, you will see them push to where they can have the children more vulnerable. They can have the family so-called more vulnerable. You know, single mother household, they're still labeling that as a family when it's really broken. There's no mom and dad. There's no grandma and grandpa. So they have to, you know, manipulate that to now that is a family. You know what I'm saying? When it ain't. It's not a family. You know what I'm saying? It's just mom and her children, or dad and his children. You know what I'm saying? That ain't a family. You know what I'm saying? So they have you identify with that. And we're at the point where the government's seeking absolute instability, finding, you know, organized chaos. You know, they want the broken, the single mother household. They want that absolutely, because now the mother will depend on the government to play the role of protector and provider that the father would play, when the government, you know, it doesn't really play that role. You know, doesn't play it closely as the father would. You know, you're not going to have a government official or the government just stop what it's doing to run and save or help one family. It's not going to do that. That's what the father would do, you know, the instability. So this is what's going on, and it's far more valuable, far easier for the government to manipulate things by having a nuclear family, because the nuclear family can easily be broken. If that breaks down, you get the single mother household, or you get the single father household, where even if you have a single father now, you know, a father will have far more, you know, far more authority in their children's life. But at the end of the day, it's a single father, as in when they're not around, their children will be raised by and manipulated by society, and their children will have a bigger void because their mother isn't around, and there's no stability. The void expands, as in the void where their parents can't cover, where their parents can't help them. It expands, you know what I'm saying? So there's a lot going on, and it's a lot easier to manipulate that. But, you know, the truth hostage. Hopefully this helped you out. Like this video.
They said the truth won't survive beside the lies that maintain the decaying faces of display.